Hey everyone! Welcome to my channel, Tech in Resham. Today, we're diving into the world of Kubernetes. We'll break down the main components, like pods, nodes, services. Kubernetes has at least one master node and one or more worker nodes. It's recommended to have at least 3 worker nodes for better performance, reliability, and to avoid service loss. In this example, we have 3 nodes, and each node has 2 pods. You can have as many pods as you want on a node as long as it has enough resources like RAM, CPU, and storage. A node can be a physical server, bare metal, or a virtual server running on a virtualization host like VMware, Proxmox, or another VE host. A pod is the smallest unit of Kubernetes, and it usually contains one app or container. Each pod has an internal IP address that Kubernetes assigns, and it's not accessible from outside. A service gives a pod a permanent IP address so it can be an external service. But it's not recommended to use a permanent IP address because it might change when you recreate the pod. Instead, use ingress, which is a domain name that points to an IP address. If the pod's permanent IP address changes, Kubernetes updates the new IP address to the domain name of ingress. So, there's no downtime for the users. It's also important not to use an external service, external IP, for a database because it contains private and sensitive information. Instead, use an internal IP address, internal services. There are 2 ways to store configuration files, config map and secret. Config map is used for non-sensitive information like IP addresses and domain names. Secret is used to store private and sensitive information like database usernames and passwords. Config map stores it in plain text, while secret stores it in base64 encoded. A volume in Kubernetes is like a hard drive on a computer, where it saves the data. We also have internal and external services. Since some apps or containers are in pods, we need to keep their data in sync and backed up in case of POD or node failure. Otherwise, we'll lose all our data, including databases. We can store it locally or remotely, and I'll explain this in more detail in my upcoming video. Now, we have everything we need, a node with one pod that contains my app, which is a website and database, and an ingress to get a domain name to translate the IP address. Users are happy, but what if the pod or node goes down? Then the whole website goes down. That's why we have another term called deployment. Deployment allows us to have multiple pods in a few nodes. Services are shared, so if one pod goes down, another pod will take its place. In addition, since we use deployment, we tell Kubernetes how many replicas we need. If we tell Kubernetes 3 replicas in deployment, then if one pod dies, Kubernetes will automatically spin up another duplicate pod. We don't have to do anything. Deployment is like the blueprint for the pods. It has the configuration to tell Kubernetes how many replicas we need. We usually work in deployment level, not the PO level. It's not recommended to replicate databases because it's state and data, and it should be managed by another Kubernetes stateful set. Deployment is for stateless apps, and stateful set is for stateful apps or databases. However, it's usually recommended to host databases outside Kubernetes because it can be a bit tricky to sync multiple DB pods. Today, we learned about nodes, pods, volumes, services, ingress, config maps, secrets, deployments, and stateful sets.